This is part one. 1990 was a totally political time. George Bush was president, people were dying of AIDS, a lot of our friends, and there was no money being spent by the government either on AIDS or art. So a lot of extreme sexual and political work was made at that time. It was just in response to the situation. But that kind of edgy political work wasn't exactly what I was doing. I felt a little like my mother. I just wasn't surprised that the government wouldn't support this work. What would you expect? I had personally grown up in a world of total censorship, so I wasn't surprised to see politicians wanting to take money away from the art that was explicitly talking about this entire reality of ours. It seemed like the real desire for them, the politicians, was to have no description. That was what they would have paid for. So first you had Ronald Reagan eating jelly beans, and now you had this guy, Bush, doing their business, wars or whatever, behind the scenes, and meanwhile propagating a giant nothing, which has become a something the government and the media have only perfected since. To a very large extent, people don't even know. I mean, it's kind of the great product of this country, the American way, a big nothing. A cataclysmic unawareness in the face of evil. And artists were getting defunded, fired essentially, for speaking the truth. It was horrible, it was shocking, but I had always gotten fired, so it just seemed normal to me. Part two of modern art was a chorus of women in Roman legionnaire costumes. I thought theater should always have a chorus or a dance scene, like on TV. I cast the Romans from the communities of women I knew, ones with relationships. The relationships would do the directing for me, I reasoned. Dancers were an easy choice since they were comfortable with their bodies and would do a lot of familiar leaning around and cavorting like men, hugging, slapping each other on the ass. Romans probably acted like that. The legionnaires were funded in the play, but also in reality by the NEA to recite bad feminist poetry, which I had written, in unison while doing a kind of water ballet in sandals on the floor. It was silly. It was hard to find someone to choreograph. I kind of wanted Groucho Marx in the avant-garde, but I never really found it. It's taken till now to be able to explain myself. I remember what I wanted. The dancers held spears and wore golden breastplates and helmets on their heads with red plumes. This section of the show was trying to be political. I was thinking, so if the government funded work they would like, how gross would that be? Nice, positive work, and also I was enjoying an opportunity to laugh fondly at the abundance of classical references in the work of the last generation of feminist artists who had always reminded me of nuns. Nuns were crazy about legionnaires when I was a kid. They were on everything. It was like they were stormtroopers, a threat. They were coming to take Jesus away, but all of us kids were him, identifying with Jesus, always in trouble. When kids were bad in Catholic school, the nuns would have the kids stand alone in the darkness of the press, which was the sliding doors at the back of the room behind where we kept our lunch boxes, coats, and boots. The press was dank and smelly, sexy, kind of a tiny sex club. I was never a kid in there, but in 6th grade a nun had me draw some legionnaires to decorate its doors. I was that kid. I was not bad, but I was also not quite here. I was like a boy in a skirt, always drawing. Those legionnaires took hours, for which I got a pocket full of candy from the nun. Butterscotch, long hours of sucking, followed the previous hours of drawing Romans. There's like themes running through this. It's like an intuitive part of a similar reading and a reading. I was draping all of that on the chorus. Some of them were dancers and some were activists who had gone to good schools, you know, like Barnard. Among the dancers was a little redhead. I knew her from when I was the artistic director of St. Mark's Poetry Project, 1984 to 87. It was a cool time. I would walk around in a ponytail and cowboy boots. It was definitely cool for a while. I mean, I had a church. Wink Adams was my partner at the project, and we got along pretty well, and then we absolutely did not. Because the Poetry Project was in trouble money-wise, and Wink decided to leave, and we had a fight. I yelled at her. I didn't think she should go. Wink was black, and I am white, and we were the same age, but I never thought our fight was about race. But you know, it can't not be. The theme of race definitely permeates my Inferno. For instance, for years I had an ongoing fight with Amiri Baraka, who was outraged at the spectacle of a white lesbian writing about sex, which was me. He and I were at this poetry conference, and after I spoke, he proclaimed that lesbian poetry and feminist poetry were pornographic and not revolutionary. I talked back, which I guess I was not supposed to do. That's class. I mean, a real white person would know to endure. I don't know that. I felt my dignity was at stake. I was supposed to just be quiet, but you know, I was the dyke in the community. There was nobody else. So then there was this buzz which became more complicated. Some people were clapping me on the back, and other people, mostly black poets, were uncomfortable. Not about what I said, but about all the back clapping and celebration. I just always spoke up. That was me. And I'm trying to say that in the poetry world, there was one kind of acceptable white speech and white poetry, and I knew that I was always occupying another. I wanted to know what you would call it. At the very least, I had to say it was there, this problem. Later, Baraka and I were on this panel, and he saw that I am, in fact, a really good poet, and I knew, of course, that he was great. He had the tumbling sound of Ginsberg and something else. We liked each other, exchanged cards, like it had been a joke. Then I reviewed a book called Heroism and Black Poetry, and I read that his father was a mailman, and Baraka himself was the first in his family to go to college, and I thought about him departing the white poetry scene for his politics, and in general, I identified with the interviews with the black poets much more than I ever did with the white poets. When Bill Clinton was the first black president, I thought, well, maybe I am just a regular black poet. But now that we do have a black president, I'm returned to just being queer.